What's going on, everybody? It's stoppage time for June 7th, 2024. And I am today keeping up my promise to take you to different places in my life as we share these episodes each week. And today I'm here just in the shadows of the Hollywood sign in my neighborhood in Central Hollywood. But on my mind this week, and kind of reflecting upon some conversations that I've had in the shows that we've been producing lately, two topics and a book recommendation that ties it all together today. So differences, diversity, and figuring out each other. That's going to be the book. So first things first, differences. One of the best parts of my life, one of the greatest parts of every day that I get to experience is the different people that I get to talk to. And when I say different people, I don't just mean different individual people that I get to speak with. That's cool. But the more important part is how different these people are than me. How these people have different life experiences, different perspectives, different backgrounds. In fact, the underlying thesis of entrepreneurial thinkers is the idea that there are different people out there who see the problems and the opportunities and the challenges in our world, who then attack them with all of their capabilities, all of their intelligence, all of their skills, all of their relationships, all of their past experiences, and they attack them in very unique ways. And so I'm always forever grateful about that. It keeps my life on edge. It keeps me curious. It keeps me learning every day. Is literally a new day when I get to talk to someone who's different than me. Right? And so this week I had a perfect example of that I'll share a little story with you. So I was in an Uber earlier this week, crossing town. Young guy, Uber driver, and we're in the Uber for 2 minutes or so, and I noticed the voices on the podcast that he's listening to on his big fancy computer screen control center of his Tesla that he's driving me in, and realized that it's a podcast that is my favorite podcast with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway, called Pivot. And it wasn't that surprised me that somebody would be listening to that very popular podcast. But what surprised me about it was that he was this kind of mid to late 20-something tattooed hipster type, stereotype almost, right? And I thought, well, that's not their probably typical demographic as a listener. And so I was kind of immediately curious now. And so we kind of felt the vibe out in the car, and I eventually said to him from the back, I was like, hey, I'm just curious, like, is that the podcast I think it is? And he's like, yeah, no, I listen to it every week. He's like, I'm fascinated by their perspectives on the big topics and the big issues of the day. And he's like, and I mostly just love to listen to podcasts to try and like hear different perspectives about things that are going on in the world other than mine. And I was like, oh, okay, now I'm hooked, right? And so we launched into this like 11-minute conversation about podcast discoverability, about how he searches for them, about why he listens to the ones that he listens to, about kind of what's intriguing to him about podcast conversations, about how long he's been listening to podcasts, about how else he consumes information or news. And at some point, about 8 or 9 minutes in, I interrupt myself and say, sorry, I'm peppering you with all these detailed questions. I said, I'm a podcaster. I said, we run 2 shows. We're building a media company, and I'm fascinated by your answers. I'm just fascinated by any time someone describes to me kind of how they listen and why they listen to what they listen to and how they find it, right? I said, we're not like a big podcast like those podcasts that you're listening to, I said, by any stretch, but we're going through the process of trying to figure out discoverability and trying to figure out like how to present the conversations that we have. And he's like, oh, wow, like tell me about your podcast. And so I explained to him this show. I explained to him Stoppage Time, our once weekly kind of recap Friday show. He's like, oh, that sounds like fun, right? I was like, I'm a little gratified when he said that, right? I was like, it is, that's the idea. And then I described to him entrepreneurial thinkers and kind of the big thesis behind that and why I believe the world needs more entrepreneurial thinkers. And he stops me and he goes, man, that's exactly why I would listen to podcasts. He's like, if you're having conversations with people that aren't necessarily the brand name people, he goes, because I hate that. I don't just follow podcasts because of the famous people. He says, frankly, I'm more interested or intrigued by people that are talking about things that are people that I don't know, right? That I've never heard of. He's like, because I believe most of the world is people that we've never heard of, right? I was like, wow, that's pretty insightful for a young kid. And so we had this whole brief conversation about entrepreneurial thinkers. And then as I'm getting out, he's like, hey, wait, hold on, is this it? And he pulls up his phone, and he sure enough has looked us up on his phone. on Apple Podcasts, and he is following it. And then he's like, okay, I'm going to put this in my queue. I'll listen to this after you get out of the car, after I finish with listening to Pivot. And I was like, I'm grateful. Thank you. That's so kind. And I joked, I was like, oh, by the way, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, share with your friends, right? So we can keep doing this. Like I say to you guys every week. But the next minute, as I was walking towards the door of where I was arriving to, I had this just wash of gratitude that flowed over me. And it wasn't like a self-satisfied gratitude of, hey, gee, aren't I special? Aren't Deanna and I amazing? The work that we do, right? Isn't this really cool? Like that, I just added one new subscriber to our follower account because of one Uber conversation. But I immediately had this gratitude for the people who come on our show every week, for the people, these different people that I get to talk to, and how different they are, and how they see the same world that we all live in so differently and so uniquely through their own perspectives. And I was immediately flashed back to a number of them, but particularly two recent last week and this week's episodes with Pedro Crespo and then Mario Carrasco. And in Pedro's case, I just thought, like, we couldn't be more different. I mean, he is a young, when I met him, like young 20s, late 20 something, first generation Latino kid growing up in New York City. He was as pure a New Yorker as I could possibly ever have imagined. And here he was, he picked himself up, he reinvented his life, he changed his aspirations, he moved to the West Coast, he moved to the Bay Area, he got himself into the tech community, got himself into the tech venture community, which is a community dominated by middle-aged, old white guys, mostly privileged, rich white guys, so a little bit like me, a lot unlike me, and has carved out an incredible path for himself in that space. But talked about how when he first arrived on the West Coast, like, he felt different, right? He felt out of place. He didn't necessarily find his tribe. He didn't see people that looked like him. And then fast forward to this week's episodes that are dropping Thursday and then next Monday on YouTube with Mario Carrasco from Think Now, the cultural insights agency, whose entire business for 15 years has been trying to decipher and understand multicultural marketing in a multicultural country, and now on a cross-border basis into Latin America. And the details and the statistics and the context, cultural context that Mario was able to share with us in the conversation that we had with him, which you should listen to if you want to understand the world that we're living in, or that you're doing business in, or that you're trying to build your career in. It's just so, I don't want to like belabor the word and like kind of say inspiring, right, and cheapen that, but it really is inspiring, and it's so informative, and it's so provides so much context and richness to my life that I never would be able to see or understand. And if it does that for me as the host who gets to ask the questions and have the conversations, my only hope and belief is that it has to do that for you, right? I mean, just in recent weeks, we've interviewed a French woman who is inspiring and teaching entrepreneurs, coaching entrepreneurs here at universities and in communities in Southern California. We've interviewed Pedro, I talked about, right? So a first generation Latino American who from New York. We've interviewed mid-30s, 40s-ish white guy from Connecticut who moves to Peru to help build the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Peru. We've interviewed a Latina woman who runs the Latino, is the CEO of the Latino Restaurant Association here in the United States and is based here in LA. We've interviewed Mario, who we talked about, right? A Mexican American growing up here in the Valley in Los Angeles, who's literally made it his business to help the rest of us understand how to exist and how to thrive in a multicultural world. And I'm like, man, this is what I get to do every day. And this is what you get to listen to if you listen to our show. So differences are to be celebrated. Differences are what make us what we are, and differences are ultimately what make our economy successful, etc. Right? So having said that, diversity was on my mind this week, obviously, right? And so in my news feed, diversity popped up and kind of played a dominant role as well. And it did in two ways. So in one way, there was a news story this week, and then in another was a social post shared by a friend that led me to check out something that I had not seen before and learn a story that I had not understood before. And so the news story was all over the news, and it's all over the venture tech community news, and it's about this venture investment group from Atlanta called Fearless Fund, and how there had been a court ruling after some multiple appeals over the last year in a court case that has basically been brought against them to stop them from doing what they do. What do? They are a predominantly Black, minority, underrepresented run organization investing money into the entrepreneurial communities of the people from where they come, into themselves, into other Black and dark-skinned, brown-skinned, Latino, underrepresented founders, women founders, etc. Right? Like, they are basically doing the good work that so few, that literally 97% of their industry doesn't do. And they've been stopped from doing that by the court systems here in the US. And why? Because of a frivolous lawsuit that was filed by a white, arch-conservative MAGA group called the American Alliance for Equal Rights, which is just a bullshit front for a nationalist, white, kind of revisionist, let's take us backwards kind of agenda, under the banner of equal rights for all. And why were they attacking this group? Why did they file this suit against this group? Because this group's grants and investments that they hand out or that they distribute to their communities aren't distributed to whites. Absurd. Right, so that's been in the news, and it's been bothering me, and it just highlights the absurdity of this game that we're playing in the United States right now. And it's a game that's unique to us right now, but it's applicable anywhere, right? When you're dividing and you're separating and you're trying to rank that we're better than this group or that group's more deserving than that group, right? Like, it's never a good thing. And so the idea that one group would come, the majority group in our country that has held all the power for all these hundreds of years, would come along and basically propose to say that a group of people in their own community that are helping other people in their own community is not being fair to the broader community is just absolute nonsense. So that's been frustrating, right? Second story, my friend Robin Ward, who I'm interviewing today for Entrepreneurial Thinkers Future Show, made a post about the MoviePass documentary on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. But I'll fast forward to the punchline here. MoviePass, which is an organization that was like hugely popular, very culturally relevant for years. I ironically was never a member. I missed it in the social cultural milieu for a bit there. But it grew to like millions and millions of users. Everybody had it. Everybody was using it to go to the movies. Everybody wondered how the business model would survive. And then eventually they failed, declared bankruptcy, etc. So I never really knew the rest of the story. Well, let me fast forward the rest of the story. The punchline is unfortunately a repeat of the Fearless Fund story, right? In some ways, but different. It was a company that was founded, created, innovated, ideated by two African-American men, both deeply experienced in the creative industries, in the film and television industries, like had credibility, had resumes, had background, had literally the idea, and grew it to its early stages over the course of 10 years. But at some point along the way, as they needed to raise more capital, they were convinced by other people around them and other investors that had interest in them that they probably would be better off if they had a middle-aged white CEO in charge of their company. And so they went down that path in the interest of trying to trust the system so that they could build their dream, only to then later have that white middle-aged CEO be a bit of a fraud, and then have him invite another white middle-aged fraudulent CEO into the mix, and have these two guys basically in 12 months completely bankrupt the company, raise a ton of money, and then completely blow it all and bankrupt the company, literally destroying these guys' dreams. The redemptive part of this story is that one of those two original Black founders, one of those smart gentlemen who created this from scratch 12 years ago, circled back and bought the rights and the IP and the property of the business back out of bankruptcy in the last couple of years, has reestablished it and has begun to rebuild the user base and do the business the right way. Basically execute on his dreams that he had for years but wasn't able to execute on, and unfortunately these guys have come along. So it's just this whole theme all week of how much disservice we do to one another when we look at those that we don't understand, or that who look at the world different than us, and we just immediately either dismiss them as not worthy, or we pigeonhole them and say, well, they can't do this or they can't do that, and the only way you can succeed in this industry or that industry or this path or whatnot is that if you have a person that looks like this, who comes from this background, that can then do that. Like that, it's just bullshit. It's so naive, it's so short-sighted. And the truth is, as Mario taught us in the episode about multicultural marketing, is the great unlock to grow all of our economies, and then therefore spill wealth down to all of us who want the opportunities to grow our businesses, grow our communities, build our families, build our own personal wealth, build generational wealth. The great unlock for that is to increase the multicultural nature, to embrace the differences, to integrate and connect with all of us, everyone. And so these examples to me are just like perfect textbook examples of what's both wrong with us, and then both like kind of where we obviously go wrong when we're heading down the path of making these types of decisions. And my mantra, or my imploration for all of you today, is just that we can do better, right? We can do better. And a tool to try and help us figure out how to do better is the book recommendation for today, which is from Malcolm Gladwell, and it's called How to Talk to Strangers, or Talking to Strangers. And you all know Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 Hours guy, the New York Times best-selling author for Outliers was the book, the host of the wildly famous and listened to Revisionist History podcast. So Gladwell wrote a book that I listened to back in 2019 while I was walking the streets of Mexico City, living my life, building our business down there. I listened to it because I listened to my books on Audible, and the Audible version of this book was incredibly unique because he narrated the story, but then he also laid over the story the actual voice clips of people in the anecdotal clips and stories that he had included throughout to illustrate his point, right? Which is that ultimately we need better tools, we need better societal norms and rules on how to understand the people that we don't understand. And if there's one great weakness or flaw in kind of the current version of where we're at as a country and really as a world, is that we're failing terribly at trying to do a better job of understanding the people we don't understand. You don't always have to agree. I'm not Pollyannish about that. In fact, I have friends that I disagree with vehemently about certain things. Like, then I also have boundaries and certain lines that say, like, if we disagree about that, like, that's a fundamental truth. And I'm sorry, there's, like, you can have your own opinion, but there's facts and there's history, and we have to adhere to that. And we can't disagree about the facts or the history. We can disagree about your opinion about it, but that also doesn't necessarily mean your opinion is right. Right, but we also just fundamentally have to do a better job of learning to appreciate the differences that exist between us, learning to embrace the diversity that is just inevitably surrounding us wherever we are in our lives, and then unleash that for the good of all of us. So a little bit of a long show today, sorry about that. I get pretty passionate about these topics of diversity, differences, and learning how to talk to strangers, which should hopefully help us learn to embrace the diversity and the differences as opportunities as opposed to obstacles. So peace. I hope you have an amazing stoppage time in your week this week, between your Friday and your weekend. I hope you find peace, love, joy, and some common understanding and empathy today in your journey. And I will see you right back here on the other side next Friday. But in the meantime, please go check us out at Entrepreneurial Thinkers. Enjoy and benefit from all of these conversations with these incredible people that I am so fortunate to get to talk to. And learn, listen, take notes, share with your friends, subscribe, like, follow, so that we can keep doing this work for you.